Shavua Tov, everybody. I hope you are keeping well. I hope you had a nice and restful Shabbos. If you had the ability to go for a walk, I hope it was enjoyable. We certainly took that opportunity to go out for a number of walks and, of course, keeping our distance from other people and doing our best to just, make the most of this difficult situation. Now, of course, this coming Wednesday night is Pesach, and I know a lot of people are highly anxious about it and wondering how the experience is going to go. Those who may have never had Pesach with just their immediate household or just relatives or so on. I think it's going to be okay. I think we'll be fine. And, if you have the ability to check in on somebody, I know that there's been some information sent from the Rabbinical Council of Victoria. If you know of a neighbor who's on their own, maybe just make up with them before Pesach that you'll just check in every day, and even if it's just standing a few meters away from the door and just having a quick hello and seeing that everybody's okay. So if you know somebody who's elderly, you know somebody who needs assistance, please call them. It doesn't have to be elderly. It could be somebody who's younger who might be vulnerable, who you might think might be feeling quite isolated or alone. So just take that opportunity to reach out if you can and set something up before the Chag. So for me personally, one of the challenging times ahead, I think, that we'll be experiencing over Pesach. Of course, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, the connection between Pesach and the topic of today. But I think one of the most moving and emotional times in the year are the times in which we recite Yizkor. We recite the memorial prayer for our departed, for our loved ones. And I have to stay inside for Yizkor to recite Yizkor for my mother. And every year, when we recite it 4 times a year on Yom Kippur, and the Shalosh Regalim on Pesach, on Shavuot, and of course on Shmini Atzeret. It's an emotional time. It's a time where I think it brings a lot of people usually to shul. Often people who don't normally attend synagogue on a regular basis will come for Yizkor because there's that emotional connection. It feels important for us to recognize and to remember and to hold dear to our loved ones who, of course, cannot be there with us physically. And so Yizkor this year is going to be exceptionally difficult for those who are used to reciting it in shul. And often, as we know, the Yizkor in shul is recited with prayers for other, more communal-related connections, like we recite for those who perished serving in the IDF, for the martyrs during the Holocaust, and so on. And so, usually the Chazan sings with a lot of meaning and emotion. And as I said, it's a very heartfelt experience, and this year we won't be able to recite Yizkor together in shul. So what I wanted to address today in the topic is, what do we do this year, firstly, which we'll get to right by the end, and what is this whole concept of Yizkor, and what is its significance? And I think understanding a little bit about Yizkor will then allow us to still be able to commemorate Yizkor this year, and to still hopefully be able to generate that connection with our loved one, and to see that whilst we cannot be in shul physically to recite it, we will still be entitled and encouraged, of course, to say it at home. And I'll talk about that, as I said, nearing the end. So firstly, what's the origin of this prayer Yizkor? Now, interestingly, Yizkor was only usually said on Yom Kippur. Now, the reason why it was said on Yom Kippur is because it says Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. And it was known that the atonement was not only for those of us who are still living, but also atonement for those who are deceased. And it's based on the Midrash Tanchuma. And the Midrash Tanchuma, I'll read what it says over there. It says in the Midrash Tanchuma that it says, I will atone for your people, Israel, whom you have redeemed. And the commentators say, when it says the first part of the verse, it's referring to the people who are still alive. And of course, the second part of the verse is referring to those who have already departed. So we see that there's this concept of redemption and forgiveness for also those who have been deceased. And the Midrash goes on to say that if you pledge charity, if you give tzedakah in memory of the person who's passed away, that's how you bring the redemption or the atonement for that person. And so therefore, giving tzedakah, giving charity or pledging charity to, in memory of the soul of our loved one, has become the way that we recognize, in a sense, the soul of our loved one on those particular days on Yizkor. And it was then extended to include the Shalosh Regalim, obviously in the times when the Jewish people lived, during biblical times, and of course during the temple times when everyone would make their pilgrimage, they would come up to Yerushalayim, and it would be a time when they would, come and it was important to bring tzedakah as well, bring charity and help to the communal things. And of course there it was appropriate to also give it in the memory of their loved ones. So we see that Yizkor is really there to do a couple of things. Firstly, it's there to renew our strength and of course to renew our strength and connection to our loved ones. It's there to solidify that bond, because of course as we go through life and we involved in all the different things that we're doing, sometimes we forget about our loved one. Not forget, of course, they're always at the top of our mind, they're always there with us in some way, but we get distracted, and then therefore on Yizkor it almost grounds us again and says, look, I want to reconnect with my loved one. And the most important part about that connection is that it brings merit to the soul of the departed, to the soul of our loved one. It can actually elevate them in their celestial homes, wherever they might be in the heavens, by you tapping in and making a pledge to tzedakah, to making a pledge to charity in their merit. It's almost like saying that yes, you don't have the ability right now to do the mitzvot. And I think, in days like this with this COVID-19 nonsense, sometimes we've taken for granted some of the things we're allowed to do and some of the things we've been able to do. Davening with a minyan, going to shul, from a religious point of view, being in a group with. So sometimes we undervalue and we don't appreciate what we've had. And of course, for the soul of our loved one, they understand that we have such a great merit, a great zchut to do mitzvot, to tap into what Hashem has asked us to do, which they don't have the ability to do anymore. So by giving tzedakah in their memory, by pledging charity and saying, I'm going to be inspired and spurred on by what my relative did, the goodness and the good things that they did in their life, I'm going to now be inspired by that and give tzedakah to charity or to my shul or to whatever organization you feel is appropriate. In a sense, it brings such great merit and comfort to the soul because they're almost now being given the ability to do mitzvot again through us. And of course, it's not limited to Yizkor times. Yizkor times has a special connection, as I said, because of Yom Kippurim and how that then translated into the other Shalosh Regalim. But really any time, and it's often what I tell mourners, God forbid at a time of loss, I say, look, and at the time of the loss, sometimes it doesn't resonate, of course, because you still have the sharp pain, you still have the hurt from obviously the initial shock and loss of somebody that you were close to. But what we do say at funerals, and of course I think many of my colleagues say, is that we want to ensure that the soul lives on through our actions, by us emulating the way in which that person lived their life. So taking the good qualities of that person, taking the kind deeds and the mitzvot that they did, and said, I'm going to live my life in doing those mitzvot in that person's memory. It's almost like they are now having the opportunity over and over again to do mitzvot. So too with Yizkor, by pledging tzedakah, and that's why you'll see in the text of Yizkor, which you can find in any Siddur, it will say there that in the text of remembering our loved one, that I'm going to pledge tzedakah in their memory. Now, of course, this year we won't be in shul and we won't be, observing what I'm about to say. But nonetheless, I think it's still interesting to mention that there are those who have the custom to, if both your parents are still alive, Baruch Hashem, b'li ayin hara, to leave the shul. There are others who say that no, that's disrespectful to those who are reciting Yizkor. So some shuls have the tradition, and I think I think the shul here at South Caulfield, what we do is we recite the communal prayers. So those for the IDF, for the martyrs of the Holocaust, and so on, and some of the stalwarts of the community who passed away. And then when we're about to recite the individual Yizkor, for a person to recite their own individual Yizkor for their loved ones, then we ask those with parents, both parents alive, to leave the shul. Now, some things people have asked me in the past: do I only say Yizkor for my parents? Can I say Yizkor for other loved ones? And the answer is yes. If you have the reason to say Yizkor for one of your parents, then you can extend saying Yizkor for anyone, for that matter. Anyone that is a relative, anyone that you loved, anyone that you care about, that you want to make a memory for them, and of course give tzedakah in their name. As I said, it's a very powerful experience for them. Somebody who is in the first year of mourning, if God forbid somebody has to be in Yizkor for the first time, here again there are a number of different customs. The prevalent custom is that you would stay inside shul for Yizkor. Of course, at home this is going to be different, but you would stay inside shul, but you would not recite the Yizkor prayer, because it says that the wound is still raw. You've just, it's too difficult. Even just sitting inside Yizkor is painful enough not to recite the words. Others still say no, that even in the first year you can recite Yizkor. So now that if you're going to be at home, of course, you can decide if it's too much for you, don't recite Yizkor. If you want to recite Yizkor, if you feel it's meaningful, then you certainly have who to rely on. Now, a couple of further things. So again, because this year most of us, all of us here in Australia at least won't be in shuls, but there will be those around the world perhaps, still recite the Yizkor. It's not like Kaddish, which can only be said in a minyan. It can certainly still be said at home, and still have the same feeling that by you reciting the Yizkor, by you pledging to the tzedakah and ensuring that you give the tzedakah, okay, because pledging for the soul and then not fulfilling that pledge is also not a very good thing, but making sure you pay up the pledge that you've made, then still recite it as you would recite it in shul with the various texts from your machzor or your siddur, and say it in their memory. Now, of course, one other thing I wanted to say, because I think each time we recite Yizkor, there's a connection to the Chag, and I think for Pesach, Yizkor takes on a whole new meaning, remembering our loved ones, because Pesach is a family time. It's a time we remember. I know for me personally, remembering my grandparents singing particular songs at the Seder, and of course, remembering different actions and different traditions that you had with your family. And of course, so Pesach is very much a raw time for Yizkor, because it generates so many different memories. And this year, how much more so, it's going to be even more difficult, because not only can we not be with those who are not physically here with us, that have passed on, but also those who may be around us in terms of being in the same city, but we can't be with them. It adds an additional level of difficulty. So please God, we will just take comfort in knowing two things. Number one, that by staying home, we are saving lives, which is the greatest mitzvah any human being can achieve. And number two, by reciting Yizkor for our loved ones and making sure we continue to say it and pledge in their name, even though we're not in shul, it does a lot and brings a lot of comfort for our loved ones. So please continue to recite it. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or send me a private message. Happy to address any questions you have. Have a wonderful week ahead.